I'm Marlene, 36 years old, and about a month ago my father got up in front of 180 people and told them I was the worst thing that ever happened to our family. It was his retirement party, out at the lake where I grew up. Every single person who ever mattered to him was in that room, which, as it turned out, left me off the list entirely. He lifted his champagne, aimed his eyes straight at me and said, "That right there is my daughter. No diploma, no prospects, just sponges off the rest of us." The whole crowd laughed. I didn't. I got to my feet, raised my glass and said, "Go ahead and enjoy that toast. It's the last one any of you will ever get from me." Then I set the glass on the table and walked out the door. The place went completely quiet, but here's the part that still makes me shake my head. The entire time my dad was turning me into his little punchline. His whole retirement, every last cent of it, was resting on a piece of land that had my name printed on the title. Not his name. Mine. And he had no idea. If you've ever been the person a family writes off, you already know exactly what that feels like. Stick with me, because the quiet ones don't stay quiet forever, and the people who counted me out are about to find out what I was actually worth. Tell me in the comments where you're listening from, and hit subscribe so you catch the rest of what happens. Now let me take you back 16 years to the family that trained me to disappear. The Fosters of Sable Lake up in Washington, that was us. Third-generation timber people, a name folks recognized, the kind of family that got the good table at the diner without ever asking for it. My father, Raymond Foster, ran a building supply business. Lumber, hardware, contractor accounts. Nothing fancy, but the money was real. We lived in a 2-story Craftsman on 5 acres, drove a big GMC Yukon, and belonged to the Antlers Club, where Raymond held court every Friday night in his quilted wool vest like he was chairing a board meeting. My mother, Sandra, kept the house perfect, and the family reputation even more so. She'd come from nothing, grew up in a trailer park outside Yakima, and she hung onto the Foster name like it was keeping her afloat. My brother Dale, 4 years older than me, was the golden boy. Star pitcher, business degree. The one my dad would point at and call the future. And then there was me, background noise. I got good grades, kept my head down, never made trouble, and somehow all of that just made me easy to forget. "Marlene's fine," my mother would say whenever anyone asked about me, like I was a lamp in the corner that still happened to work. The one person who actually saw me was my grandfather, Harold. He'd bring me out to the property on weekends, 18 acres of Douglas fir and wild huckleberry running all the way down to the water. We'd walk the tree line at dusk while the loons called out across the lake, those long lonely notes skipping off the surface. The old dock down at the shore creaked under our feet, every cedar board flexing as we stepped. "You hear that?" Grandpa Harold would say, nodding toward the water. "That's the sound of being home." He left me something before he passed. Something nobody else in the family ever bothered to read closely, but I'll come back to that. The day my future got taken away was a Wednesday in October. I was 20, halfway into my sophomore year at Washington State. Business administration, 3.8 GPA, a part-time job at the registrar's desk. I had a routine and a plan. My dad called and said 2 words. "Come home." I made the 3-hour drive to Sable Lake sure that somebody had gotten sick. I found him in the living room with my mother. Nobody was sick. Raymond sat in his leather recliner with his arms crossed. Sandra stood behind him with a hand on his shoulder, a united front. "We've gone over the numbers," Raymond said. "Dale got into the MBA program. It's not cheap. We can't pay for both of you." He stopped there like he expected me to finish the thought for him. I didn't. "So we've decided you'll take some time off," he went on. "1 semester, maybe 2. Let Dale get set up, and then we'll look at it again." Sandra nodded along. "School's just not your strength, not the way it is for your brother," she said, and her voice was so smooth it almost sounded gentle. "Besides, a girl your age should be thinking about starting a family anyway." I sat down on the edge of the couch and said nothing. Not because I agreed with any of it. Because the small, foolish part of me that still believed things were supposed to be fair had just gone silent for good. "You told me Mom's money was set aside for my school," I said. His jaw went tight. Things change. Except they hadn't. 2 years later, a cousin who'd had too much wine at Thanksgiving let it slip that the money had been sitting there the whole time. They just picked Dale. That afternoon, my father looked at me and made a wager. He bet on the winner. I was the backup. I wouldn't hear those exact words for another 16 years, standing in a parking lot, but that's where it started. I packed one suitcase, drove to the city with $2,100 in the bank, and a car that still smelled like pine sap. My first place was a studio in the Ballard neighborhood of Seattle. 350 square feet over a nail salon, a radiator that ticked all night, one window facing a parking lot. I got a job answering phones at a commercial real estate brokerage. Minimum wage, no commission, no title on the door. The broker who ran the place, a woman named Paula Brennan, was 32 back then and building her own firm from the ground up. She paid attention to things. "You read lease agreements for fun?" she asked me one afternoon, catching me marking up a contract with a highlighter. "For the education," I said. She raised an eyebrow. "Most people who paid for a degree don't bother doing that." I studied for my real estate license after hours. Free online prep courses, textbooks from the library, practice tests spread across my kitchen counter while I ate noodles straight out of the pot. Passed on my first attempt. Within 2 years, I had my broker's license. Within 4, Paula and I were partners. Foster and Brennan Commercial Real Estate, Seattle. We handled warehouse conversions and mixed-use projects, the kind of deals where you're reading 60 pages of zoning code before your coffee's even cold. I got married at 28 to a man named Trevor, who was more in love with the idea of me than the actual person. We split up at 32, clean and quick. My family took it as proof of something. "See," Sandra told a cousin. "She can't keep anything going." I didn't call to defend myself. I didn't call at all. I built my life around contracts and closings and clients who paid me for my judgment. Turns out you don't need a diploma to read an agreement better than the men who laughed at you. You just need time. And I had all the time in the world because nobody was sitting around waiting on me. Grandpa Harold was the only Foster who ever made me feel like I belonged. He was a quiet man. 6'3", hands like worn leather, a voice like gravel rolling in a creek bed. He'd built the cabin at Sable Lake himself back in 1976. Milled the lumber by hand, set every stone in the fireplace. The 18 acres around it were his church. He walked them every single morning with a brass compass he'd carried since his army days, checking the tree line, reading the soil. When I was little, he'd let me hold that compass while we walked. The needle would swing and settle, swing and settle. "True north never argues with you," he'd say. "It just points." When I was 25, 5 years after they'd shoved me out of school, Grandpa Harold drove all the way to the city and took me to lunch at a diner on Fremont Avenue. He slid an envelope across the table. Inside was a photocopy of a deed. "I put the land in both our names," he said. "Joint tenants with right of survivorship. You know what that means?" I didn't, not really. I was already a broker, but at 25 I was still learning the deeper stuff. I figured it was sentimental. His way of telling me the place belonged to me as much as to him. "It means the day something happens to me, it's yours," he said. "Right away, no probate, no lawyers, no Raymond in the middle of it." He held my eyes steady. "The land remembers who walked it, Marlene. That's you, not them." I thanked him and tucked the photocopy into a drawer. I treated it like a memento, not a weapon. Harold died 5 years ago at 84, pneumonia. Fast and quiet, the way he did everything. At his funeral by the lake, the loons were calling at dusk. I stood in the back row with his brass compass in my coat pocket, and I still had no idea what he'd really handed me. About a month ago, the invitation showed up at my office. Thick cardstock, gold lettering pressed into it. "Raymond Foster warmly invites you to celebrate 40 years of service and the start of a well-earned retirement." I almost dropped it in the recycling. Almost. Then my phone rang. It was Aunt Nancy, my father's younger sister, the one relative who still bothered to call me. "Marlene, honey, did the invitation reach you? Just opened it. There's something you ought to know." Her voice dropped lower. This party isn't only about him retiring, your dad's selling the lake property. All 18 acres, the cabin, everything. Some developer down in Portland Meridian Land Group wants it for a resort. They're closing the week after the party. My stomach clenched. Grandpa's land. The tree line, the dock, the loons. How much? I asked. 2.7 million. Your father's been counting on that money for months. He already put deposits down on a retirement RV and a condo over in Wenatchee. And Dale borrowed against the money before it's even come in. Some kind of business loan. She paused. I just thought you should hear it from me first. I thanked her and hung up. I sat in my corner office, third floor, a view of Lake Union out the window, and stared at that invitation. They were selling Grandpa's land. The place he'd walked every morning, the place where he'd put a compass in my hand and told me the land remembers who walked it. Something about it didn't add up. A feeling I couldn't name yet, like a total that refuses to balance, a decimal sitting one column off. I picked up a pen and checked yes on the RSVP. I told myself I was going to say goodbye to the lake, and to a family I'd already lost anyway. What I didn't know was that I was walking straight into something much bigger. The party was at the Sable Lake Lodge, an old sawmill on the North Shore that the town rented out for weddings and funerals and everything in between. String lights, white tablecloths, a caterer serving salmon on cedar planks, 180 guests. Business contacts, lodge buddies, cousins, the mayor. I wore a charcoal sheath dress, simple and well cut. My own money, my own taste. Nothing that announced itself, nothing that begged for a reaction. Sandra caught me at the door. She had on a cream silk blouse with a pearl brooch the size of a quarter, and she wore the same smile she'd worn my whole life. Warm on top, ice underneath. You made it, she said. Try not to turn tonight into something about you. I smiled right back. Wouldn't think of it. Inside, I went looking for my seat. Table 14, back corner, right next to the kitchen door, wedged between a second cousin I hadn't laid eyes on in 10 years and the wife of my dad's accountant. Not the family table. Ashley, Dale's wife, all bouncy blonde hair and monograms on everything, appeared at my elbow. Sit where you're assigned, Marlene. Tonight's about real accomplishment. I sat. I watched. Dale was up near the stage, practicing his confident laugh with a craft beer in hand, telling some banker all about his growth strategy. Raymond stood by the bar in a brand new blazer, shaking hands, soaking up the praise like it was sunshine. I slipped out onto the deck for a minute of air. The dock was still there, the same one Grandpa Harold had built, the boards groaning under my heels in the quiet. Across the water, a loon called, low and shaking and alone. I set my hands on the railing and breathed. Something about that land sale kept nagging at me. A decimal point. A column I hadn't checked yet. I came back in for the salad and sat down just in time to catch the conversation at the table behind me. My dad's voice carries. Always has. He was talking to a man in a navy blazer I didn't recognize, someone wearing a Meridian Land Group pin on his lapel. We close next Friday, Raymond said, leaning in like he was sharing a secret he actually wanted everybody to overhear. 2.7 million. 40 years of sweat in this town, and that land is my paycheck out the door. The developer nodded. Gorgeous parcel, the lake frontage alone is worth half of what you're getting. You bet it is, my dad said. And Dale's already got part of it spoken for, growing the supply company, new warehouse, new trucks. The Foster name's about to be bigger than it's ever been. Dale drifted over and clapped him on the back. We just need Marlene to sign a couple of family documents at closing. Paperwork. A formality. He said it the way you'd mention validating a parking ticket. Trivial, not worth a second thought. I set my fork down. Family documents. A formality. Something in that snagged like thread catching on a nail. Why would they need my signature if the land was Raymond's? Out past the glass doors, the loon called again. The sound drifted across the water and into the room, and for a second I was 8 years old again, standing on that dock with Grandpa Harold's compass in my hands, watching the needle settle on true north. The land remembers who walked it, he'd told me. I picked up my water and took a slow sip. I didn't have any answers. But now I had a question, the kind that keeps you staring at the ceiling at 3 in the morning. And in my line of work, a question with no answer is the most dangerous thing in the room. Someone tapped a fork against a glass. Raymond stood up from the head table and climbed the 2 steps to the little stage. Applause rolled out, warm and generous, the kind you give a man a town has known for 40 years. A spotlight found him, and there he stood in his new blazer with the club pin on the lapel, mic in hand, looking every bit the patriarch he believed himself to be. "Thank you all for coming out," he said. 40 years in this business. Not bad for a kid who started stacking 2x4s at 16. Laughter. He worked the room like he'd done it 1,000 times, thanking his partners, his crew, the mayor. Then the family part. "My wonderful wife, Sandra. 30 years of patience and grace." Applause. Sandra touched her brooch and dabbed at one eye. "My son Dale, stepping up to lead the next generation. I couldn't be prouder of him." A standing ovation. Dale rose, waved, grinning like the win was already in the bag, then his eyes landed on me. Table 14 next to the kitchen. His smile shifted, went thin. "And this here is my daughter, Heather. Sorry, Marlene." He gave a little dismissive wave of his hand. "No diploma, no prospects, just sponges off the family." A pause, timing. He'd practiced this. Maybe one day she'll find some fellow willing to take that on. 180 people laughed. Some loud, some nervous, some just because they figured this was the kind of ribbing dads do at parties. Aunt Nancy, 3 tables over, stared down at her plate. The salmon in front of me was going cold. I felt the spotlight burning across my face and 180 pairs of eyes settling on my skin like hands. I didn't flinch. Didn't blink. I folded my napkin, laid it beside my plate, pushed my chair back, and stood up slowly. The laughter was still trailing off into coughs and throat clears as people realized I was on my feet. I reached for my champagne, held it at chest height. Steady hand. My father's smile flickered. He hadn't expected me to move. I was supposed to sit there and take it, the way I'd taken everything for 36 years. "Congratulations on the retirement, Dad," I said. My voice carried. Clean and even, no shake in it. The mic was still hot up on that stage, but the room had gone quiet enough that I didn't need one. 40 years, quite a legacy. I lifted the glass an inch higher. "Here's to that. And here's to the last time any of you will ever see me." I put the glass down without taking a drink, picked up my bag, and turned for the door. My heels hit the deck boards outside, the same ones that used to groan under Grandpa Harold's boots, the same ones I'd crossed 1,000 times as a girl. The sound cracked through the silence like a gavel coming down. Behind me, nothing, no laughter, no applause, just the buzz of the string lights and 180 people trying to decide whether they just watched a woman fall apart or draw a line. I didn't run, didn't hurry. Spine straight, chin level, eyes ahead. I heard a glass clink somewhere, somebody setting it down too hard. Then a low, confused murmur rippling table to table. A woman I'd never met whispered, "That wasn't a joke, was it?" No, it wasn't. I pushed through the double doors into the cool September night. The lake was black glass. Far across the water, a loon called. I didn't know any of them a speech. The silence had said plenty. I was halfway to my car when I heard them coming. Sandra's heels first, quick and uneven on the gravel. Then Raymond's heavy stride. "Heather, Marlene, stop!" Sandra grabbed my arm. Her face was flushed, the pearl brooch catching the light from the parking lot lamp. "Do you have any idea what you just pulled in there? Your father is mortified." I looked at her hand on my arm until she let go. "He mortified me, Mom, in front of everyone, on a microphone." "It was a joke, Marlene. Don't be so dramatic." Raymond reached us, breathing hard, blazer hanging open, his face the color of raw cedar. "Get back inside," he said. Low and controlled, the voice he used when he meant it. "You apologize right now." "No," I said it plainly, like a door swinging shut. "You've spent my whole life telling me what to do. That's the last order you get to hand me." Sandra's composure cracked. Something ugly moved across her face. Not sadness, not regret, but the fury of a woman losing control of a story she'd been writing for decades. "You were the backup, Marlene," she said, cold, flat. Like she was reading a line off a spreadsheet. "Dale was always the plan." There it was. The thing I'd felt my entire life, finally said out loud in a parking lot lit by one flood lamp with the noise of the party leaking through the lodge walls. I looked at my mother, studied her face, and filed the sentence away somewhere it would keep. "Thank you," I said, "for finally saying it." I turned, opened my car door, and slid into the seat. Raymond stepped forward. "You walk away now and you're finished in this family." "You understand me?" I started the engine. "I've been finished for 16 years, Dad, you just never noticed." And I drove off. About 30 minutes south of Sable Lake, I pulled off the highway and sat in the dark with the engine running and both hands locked on the wheel. Let me step out of the story for a second. If you've ever been the one parked at the far table while everybody toasted somebody else, I see you. I sat at that table for 36 years. If any of this is landing close to home, hit that like button so I know you're out there, and stay with me because the next part is where the whole floor shifts. Okay, back to it. I drove the 3 hours home in silence. No radio, no calls, just the white lines and the hum of the motor and the same questions spinning in my head like a song I couldn't get out. Why do they need my signature? I'm a commercial broker. I've closed hundreds of deals. I know exactly what "sign a couple of family documents" means when it slides out of a mouth like Dale's. It means somebody's shuffling paper around and would rather you didn't read the fine print. Raymond said the land was his. The whole family had always talked like it was his. But Harold, careful, deliberate, trust nobody Harold, had sat across a diner table from me 11 years back and said the words "joint tenants with right of survivorship." I'd filed that deed in a drawer and treated it like a keepsake. A soft gesture from a man who knew he was running out of time. Except Harold didn't do soft gestures. He did land surveys and title insurance, and carpenter's chalk snapped along a plumb line. Everything that man ever did had a reason underneath it. By the time I pulled into my parking garage back in the city, it was midnight. I dropped my bag on the kitchen counter, opened my laptop, and typed in "joint tenancy right of survivorship Washington." And then, for about 10 seconds, I forgot how to breathe. The next morning, Aunt Nancy showed up at my office. 10 o'clock sharp, carrying a plain cardboard box, the kind you get from a moving supply store. No ribbon, no card, just a box she'd been holding on to. "Harold told me to hand these over when the moment was right," she said, setting it down on my desk. "After Saturday, I figure this counts." She lifted out a folded flannel shirt, a worn pocket knife, and then, wrapped in a soft handkerchief, the brass compass. I took it in my hand. It sat there heavy and cool, exactly the way it used to when I was small, like gripping the hand of somebody you'd trust with anything. "Your grandmother never let Raymond within reach of that deed," Nancy said. She'd settled onto the edge of my guest chair, reading glasses shoved up into her hair. "Harold had it drawn a specific way on purpose. He used to joke that your father would sell the headstones off a graveyard if he thought there was a dollar in it." I turned the compass over. The brass casing was scuffed from decades out in the field, but the needle still swung smooth and clean, settled true. "Nancy, do you actually know what joint tenancy with right of survivorship means?" She shook her head. "He never walked me through the legal side. He just told me you'd sort it out when the day came." She reached over and laid her hand on top of mine. "He picked you, honey. Not your dad, not Dale, you." After she left, I sat alone and looked at the compass on my desk. The needle held north. "True north never argues," Grandpa Harold used to say. "It just points." I picked up the phone and called Marcus Reyes, the best property attorney I knew and a man who read title reports the way other people read the sports page. "Marcus, I need a certified copy of a recorded deed out of the Chelan County Recorder's office. Today, if you can swing it." He had it in my hands by 3 that afternoon. I laid it out on my desk next to the compass and just stared at the vesting paragraph for a while. The wording was tight, no wiggle room, the kind of language you use when you want to shut the door on any argument before it starts. Harold M. Foster and Marlene J. Foster, as joint tenants with right of survivorship, and not as tenants in common. Recorded 11 years earlier. Stamped, indexed, sitting in the public record where anybody could find it if they bothered to look. I read it once, then again, then a third time. Then I put both palms flat on the desk and let it sink into the part of my brain that handles numbers, the part that knows when a total lines up and when it doesn't. Joint tenants with right of survivorship. When Harold died 5 years ago, his half of that property never touched his estate. It didn't pass through any will. It didn't root through Raymond's hands. It didn't matter one bit what Raymond's copy of the will happened to say. Under Washington law, the second Harold stopped breathing, his share dropped automatically into the lap of the surviving joint tenant. Me. I had legally owned all 18 acres of lakefront timber for 5 years and had no earthly right. And Raymond, who'd been negotiating a $2.7 million sale, who'd already spent that money in his head, who'd thrown a party to toast it, had been trying to sell a piece of land that wasn't his to sell. That family paperwork Dale wanted me to sign at closing, it was a quitclaim deed. A single sheet that would sign my ownership straight over to Raymond for nothing. They weren't asking me to rubber stamp a formality. They were asking me to hand over $2.7 million and say thank you for the pen. I set the compass down on top of the deed. The needle held north. The land remembers who walked it. And now I knew exactly whose name was on it. Marcus came by the next day, jacket off, sleeves pushed up. He'd spent an hour reading the deed and cross-checking it against the state statutes. "This thing is bulletproof," he said. "Washington requires the survivorship language to be spelled out plainly on the deed, and Harold's attorney used the exact phrasing you'd want. There's no gray area anywhere in it. And the will doesn't touch this parcel. The will could say every last thing he owned goes to Raymond and it wouldn't matter. Survivorship beats whatever a will intends. It's automatic. The instant Harold died, you were the sole owner." I leaned back. "So Raymond can't sell it. Raymond can't sell what Raymond doesn't own. The title company will trip over this the second they run their search, assuming they haven't already. His name isn't on the deed. Yours is. Without a signed quitclaim from you, that sale flat out cannot close. I've owned it for 5 years. How did nobody notice?" "Because nobody went looking," Marcus said. "The tax bills still get mailed to your parents' house. The assessor sends them to whatever address is on file, and Harold never changed it. Raymond's been paying those bills thinking they're his own. And the developer's title company only pulled their preliminary report a few weeks back. That's normal. They don't dig into title until the deal's nearly done. Raymond's lawyer likely spotted the vesting problem and decided the simplest fix was a quick signature from you at the table. Sign here, problem gone, nobody has to explain anything." Something settled in my chest. Not anger. I'd burned through the anger years ago. Something colder and clearer than that. Like reaching a ridge line after the clouds finally lift and seeing exactly how far up you've come. "So they don't need my permission," I said. "They need my signature, and I stopped signing what I'm told a long time ago." Marcus shut his folder. "What do you want to do?" I picked up the compass, rolled it between my fingers, set it back down. "I want to be in the room at that closing, and I want the title officer to read the vesting out loud in front of every one of them." He gave a slow nod. "I can make that happen." "Good. My father spent 40 years telling this town I was worthless. Time the official record showed something different. That night Paula and I stayed late in the conference room with takeout boxes and a whiteboard covered in numbers. "Walk me through what happens if this deal dies," I said. She pulled up the figures. "If the sale falls apart, Raymond loses the $2.7 million payout he's already spent in advance. Deposit on the RV, deposit on the condo up in Wenatchee. Both of those are probably non-refundable or come with penalties. And Dale took out a $720,000 expansion loan against the supply company. The bank structured it assuming the land sale proceeds would back it up. If the deal collapses, the bank comes back to the table. Best case, they tighten the terms. Worst case, they call the loan. Either way, his expansion is dead in the water." I looked at the whiteboard. $2.7 million and a $700,000 loan, all hanging off a single signature. "Mine. I don't want to wreck them," I said. "The people who work at that supply yard didn't do anything. Half the contractors in that town depend on it." Paula peered at me over her glasses. You're not wrecking anything. You're declining to give away property that's legally yours. Those are two different things. She was right. I wasn't blowing up a deal. I wasn't suing anybody. I wasn't calling reporters or leaking anything. I was exercising a right that had been sitting in the public record for over a decade, a right they'd tried to make disappear with one quiet signature and a friendly smile. I just want it said out loud, I told her. In a room where people can hear it. After that, I'm done. She nodded. Then be done, just be done on your own terms. The messages started rolling in Monday. Not from Raymond, he was far too proud to make the first call. But the machine kicked on. My mother's sister, Aunt Gail. Marlene, sweetheart, I heard about the party. Your father says you've been having a hard time lately. We're all worried about you. Then a cousin I hadn't heard from in years. Ray mentioned you might need some support right now. I'm here if you want to talk. Then the accountant's wife. I saw what happened Saturday. He didn't mean it, honey. He was just nervous up there. The story was already assembled and shipped out. Poor fragile Marlene, jealous and unstable, having some kind of meltdown at her father's party. And Raymond Foster, the patient dad, the town cornerstone, doing his level best with a difficult daughter. I answered none of them. Then Tuesday afternoon, a text from Dale. Don't forget to sign the family paperwork before Friday. Dad's attorney will email you the docs. Just sign wherever it's flagged. No context. No explanation. An order wearing the costume of a friendly reminder. I read it twice. They still thought I had no clue. Still figured I'd sign away $2.7 million because my big brother told me to, because I was the spare, and the spare does what she's told. I kept it short. Thanks for thinking of me. Then I called Marcus and confirmed the closing. Friday, 10 a.m. at a title company in Wenatchee. Raymond, Dale, the developer's rep, and the escrow officer would all be there. One thing, I said. Make sure there's a seat at that table for me. Already handled, Marcus said. I set the phone down. They were a week out from the biggest shock of their lives, and they were still sliding paperwork under my nose like I was a kid being handed a form to sign. Wednesday morning, my assistant knocked. There's a man in the lobby saying he's your brother. I thought about telling her I didn't have one. Send him in. Dale walked into our office like a health inspector. His eyes went to the reception desk, the framed deal announcements on the walls, the conference room with its view of the water. I watched him recalculate everything in real time. The little widening of the eyes, the jaw that clenched and let go. This wasn't what he'd pictured. He'd pictured a card table and a phone that wouldn't stop ringing. Nice little operation, he said, dropping into the chair across from me without an invitation. Didn't realize playing realtor paid like this. It does when you're good at it. He crossed one ankle over his knee. Brand new loafers, not a scuff on them. Look, I didn't drive down here to fight. I came to make this simple. Show up Friday, sign the quitclaim, and Dad's lawyer hands you a check. 20 grand, call it a family gesture. $20,000 for $2.7 million in land. I almost had to admire the nerve. And if I don't sign? His smile went flat. Don't get clever, Marlene. You sign, you disappear, everybody's happy. That's the arrangement. Then, without even meaning to, he handed me the whole thing. I've got a $700,000 loan built around those sale proceeds. If this thing blows up because you're throwing a fit, I swear to God. He caught himself and swallowed the rest. But the number was already out in the open. The leverage was sitting right there on the table. I'll think about it, I said. Level professional, the tone I use with a difficult client when I'm already 3 steps ahead of them. Dale stood, gave the office one more sweep with his eyes, and left without a goodbye. I watched him go. Then I picked up the brass compass and held it until my heartbeat slowed back down. Thursday evening my mother called. I picked up because I was curious which version of Sandra was going to show. Marlene's sweetheart, version 1. The peacemaker, sweet, careful, a little breathless. I've been thinking about you all week. I feel just awful about the party. Do you? Your father loves you, he just doesn't always know how to show it. You know how he gets, he's clumsy with his words. Clumsy, 180 people and a live microphone, and she called it clumsy. Mom, does Dad want to apologize for what he actually said? A pause. The kind of pause that tells you the script is being rewritten right there on the fly. He wants to move forward. We all do. Can't we just put this behind us and, so, no apology? Marlene, don't be difficult. We're trying to meet you halfway. Halfway would mean somebody admitting what happened, what he said, what you said in the parking lot. Silence. And then version 2 showed up. The mask slid off, and underneath it was the Sandra I'd known my whole life. The one who kept a running tally, who decided somewhere along the way that one of her kids was an investment and the other was just overhead. You want to know your problem? Her voice went flat. You've always believed you were owed more than you ever earned. Your father built everything this family has, everything, and all you've ever done is take. I haven't taken a dime from this family in 16 years. Then why are you making this so hard? There it was, the real question, not how are you, not can we fix this, just why won't you sign? Forgiveness and being a doormat aren't the same thing, Mom, I said. I finally learned the difference. I hung up before she could answer. My hands were steady. My voice had never wavered. I was ready for Friday. 6 a.m. Friday, Marcus, Paula, and I sat at my kitchen table with coffee and a folder of documents. Walk me through the order of things, I said. Marcus opened his notepad. Closings at Cascade Title Company in Wenatchee. Standard setup. The title officer reviews the preliminary report, confirms vesting, everyone signs, funds move. But the title officer is legally obligated to verify that the seller actually holds title. That's the wall this hits. So when she reads the vesting, she reads my name. Marlene J. Foster, sole owner by right of survivorship. Raymond's name isn't anywhere on that deed. Without your consent, the sale can't move an inch. Paula leaned in. You sure you don't just want to send a letter? You don't have to sit in that room. I'd considered it. A letter would be cleaner, less exposure. But a letter wouldn't put the truth on the record in front of witnesses. A letter could be reworded, softened, spun. I'm going so it's on the record, I said. If I stay home, Raymond controls the story. He'll tell everyone I'm crazy, that I forged something, that I made it all up. I need the title officer to say it out loud. I need the developer to hear it. I need it to land in a room full of people who can't pretend they didn't. Marcus nodded. Then we drive up to Wenatchee this afternoon. I'll file an appearance as your counsel. Everything stays clean and professional. I packed an overnight bag, set the brass compass on top of my clothes, and zipped it shut. This wasn't about winning. It was about sitting in a room and being seen for once, the way Grandpa Harold had always seen me. I drove up that afternoon, checked into a hotel near the river, and sat on the bed with the compass in my lap. Quick pause here. People love to say the best revenge is living well. I used to think that was a bumper sticker. But sitting in that hotel room holding a deed with my name on it, I finally understood it. If you've made it this far with me, drop one word in the comments. Boundaries. I want to see how many of us there are. Okay, let's finish this. I couldn't sleep that night. Not nerves, something else. A memory I hadn't touched in years. I was maybe 6. Raymond had taken Dale out on the lake to fish, and I'd asked to come along. Fishing's not for girls, Raymond said. He wasn't even mean about it. He said it the way you'd say dogs aren't for apartments, like it was just a fact of the world. Grandpa Harold had been standing in the doorway. He didn't argue with Raymond. He just took my hand, walked me down to the dock, and put a rod in my hands. We sat out there for 3 hours. I caught 2 trout. He caught nothing. See, he said. The lake doesn't care who fishes it. I lay in that hotel room holding the compass to my chest and thought about how Raymond had never once, not in my whole life, changed his mind about what a girl was for. He'd had 36 years. He'd had a daughter who built a company, survived a divorce, learned to read contracts and title reports better than the men who mocked her, all without a single college credit. And he still stood on a stage and used her as the punchline. Some people don't change. The trick is figuring out that their opinion was never the thing that mattered. Tomorrow the record would show what did. Friday morning, 8 a.m., Aunt Nancy called. No hello, no small talk. I should have told you this a long time ago. Told me what? The reason your grandfather put that land in your name. She took a breath. Years back, Raymond tried to sell the property behind Harold's back. Went to a developer, got a verbal offer, even had a listing agreement drawn up. Harold found out and nearly cut him off for good. They didn't speak for 2 years. I sat down on the edge of the bed. That's when Harold went to a lawyer and rewrote the deed. Joint tenancy with you. He told me if I leave it in my will, Raymond fights it. If I put it in a trust, Raymond lawyers his way in. Survivorship is the one lock he can't pick. There's more, Nancy said, and her voice got thinner. The college money. The fund Harold set up for your schooling. You remember that? I did. Barely. Sandra drained it, rolled it into Dale's first business loan. Harold only found out after it was done. That's the real reason there was nothing for your tuition. It wasn't that they couldn't afford it. They took what was already yours. The room seemed to tilt. 16 years of believing I was the spare, and the math had been rigged from the very first day. Your grandpa wanted to tell you himself, Nancy said. But by the time he was ready, he was already too sick. She paused. He said the land knows who walked it, and that when you were ready, the land would speak for him. I put my hand over my eyes and breathed until I was steady again. He didn't choose you to get back at them, Nancy added. He chose you because you actually love the place. Thank you, Nancy. Go get what's yours, honey. 9:15. I stood at the bathroom mirror buttoning my blazer. Navy, clean lines. The compass sat on the counter catching the light. My phone buzzed. A voicemail from Raymond, left at 7 that morning. Marlene Dale says you'll be at the closing today. Good, just sign the paperwork. Don't make a scene and we can all move on. The attorney will explain the documents. It's very straightforward. Straightforward. A quitclaim deed handing over sole ownership of $2.7 million in lakefront property. Very straightforward indeed. I played it once more and deleted it. Not out of anger, just tidying up. I didn't need his words in my phone. I had his father's words on a recorded deed in a county office, and those were the only ones that carried any weight. Marcus met me in the lobby at 9:30. You good? I'm fine. You don't have to do this face to face. I can file a formal objection and, Marcus, I held up a hand. I've been invisible to these people for 36 years. Today I'm going to sit in a room with them and let the title officer say my name out loud. That's all. He nodded, and we drove over in silence. Cascade Title Company sat in a plain office building off the highway, wedged between a dentist and an accounting firm. Nothing dramatic, just a conference room with a long table, weak coffee, and buzzing fluorescent lights. The kind of room where millions of dollars change hands every week and nobody blinks. I stepped out of the car into a cold, bright morning, the sky that pale mountain blue you only get out east of the Cascades. Somewhere out there a loon might have been calling on the water. I couldn't hear it, but I could feel it. Today the land would speak for my grandfather, and I'd speak for myself. The conference room was half full when Marcus and I walked in. Raymond sat at the head of the table in a sport coat, dressed for a victory lap. Sandra was beside him, gripping her handbag. Dale and Ashley across the way, Dale's leg jackhammering under the table. At the far end sat the developer's rep, a woman named Denise Corbin in a charcoal suit, and the escrow officer from the title company, a calm woman with reading glasses on a chain. Marcus pulled out the chair in the middle of the table and set his briefcase down. I sat next to him. Raymond's head turned. His face ran through 3 expressions in about 2 seconds. Surprise, confusion, then something harder. What are you doing here? Not a greeting. An accusation. I was invited to a closing, I said. Seemed appropriate since my name's apparently on some paperwork. Dale leaned forward. We went over this. You sign the quitclaim, you get your check, everybody goes home. I never agreed to sign anything, Dale. Denise Corbin looked from me to Raymond to Dale. I'm sorry, is there a title issue I should know about? The escrow officer opened her folder. We're about to go through the preliminary title report. If there are any concerns, they'll come up now. There's no issue, Raymond said fast. My daughter's here as a courtesy. There's a minor signature we need from her, that's all. Actually, I said, and the room went still, before anyone signs anything, I'd like the title officer to read the current vesting out loud, for the record. The escrow officer glanced at Marcus. He nodded. My client is the record owner of this property. She has every right to request a vesting review. Raymond's face lost its color, not gradually. All at once, like a tide going out. The escrow officer adjusted her glasses and turned to the vesting page. The only sound in the room was the hum of the lights and Dale's leg, which had finally gone still. The subject property is described as follows, she read, in the flat, precise cadence of somebody who does this 50 times a week. 18 acres, more or less, situated in Chelan County, Washington, together with all improvements thereon, commonly known as the Sable Lake parcel. She turned the page. Title is vested in, she paused, and I watched her eyes run across the line twice, confirming what she was already seeing. Marlene J. Foster, as surviving joint tenant, by operation of the right of survivorship established by deed recorded and indexed with the Chelan County Recorder's Office. She looked up. There is no co-owner. Ms. Foster is the sole title holder of record. The silence in the room had weight to it. Raymond stared at the escrow officer like she'd spoken to him in another language. Sandra's hand went to her brooch. Dale's mouth opened, closed, opened again. Denise Corbin turned slowly toward my father. Mr. Foster, she said, you represented that you held clear title to this property. Raymond said nothing. The deed was recorded over a decade ago, Marcus said, even in calm. It's public record. A standard title search would have turned it up immediately. My client's position is simple, I added, keeping my voice exactly where I keep it in every negotiation. Level professional final. I'm the legal owner. I did not authorize this sale, and I will not be signing a quitclaim deed. I looked at my father. He had both hands clamped on the edge of the table. No diploma, I said quietly. No prospects. Turns out the deed only ever needed one name. Mine. Raymond blew up. Not the slow, controlled anger he used at home. The real thing, loud and red. This is fraud. He shoved his chair back. My father was senile when he signed that. I'll contest it. I'll hire every lawyer in this county. The deed was executed when Harold Foster was 78 years old, Marcus said, not lifting his voice a notch. In good health and represented by his own independent attorney. The recording came with a notarized affidavit of capacity. On top of that, Mr. Foster filed a federal gift tax return for the transfer, which the IRS accepted without an audit. He opened a folder and laid 3 documents on the table. Capacity affidavit, gift tax filing, recording confirmation, all public record. Raymond looked at the papers like they were on fire. He had no right. He had every right, I said. It was his land. Dale was on his feet now. Do you understand what you're doing? I've got a $700,000 loan built around this. Structured against proceeds you never owned, Marcus finished. That's a problem for your bank, not for my client. Sandra started to cry. Soft, shuddering little sobs, her hand pressed to her mouth. I'd watched this performance my whole life. At holidays, in arguments, any time a conversation started drifting somewhere she couldn't steer it. How could you do this to your own family? She whispered. I looked at her. You called me the spare, Mom. Spares are what you keep around for when everything else fails. I paused. Looks like everything else just did. Ashley muttered something about how selfish I was. Denise Corbin was already stacking her files. The deal was dead and she knew it. I sat still, hands folded, heartbeat steady. The compass was in my blazer pocket and I could feel it against my ribs. The land remembers who walked it, Grandpa Harold had said. It does, it always did. And now, finally, so did everyone in that room. I let the quiet hold for a few seconds, then I spoke. I'm not selling the property, I said. Not today, not to Meridian, not to anybody. Raymond opened his mouth. I kept going. I'm keeping it, fixing up the cabin, taking care of the timber, clearing the trail back down to the water. Grandpa Harold spent 50 years looking after that land, and I intend to do the same. You can't, Dale started. I can, I'm the owner, that's what owning something means. I stood, buttoned my blazer, and looked at my father one last time. He seemed smaller than I remembered. Not physically. He was still a big man. But something behind his eyes had caved in. The man who'd stood on a stage a few weeks earlier and called me worthless was sitting in a title company conference room, realizing his worthless daughter held the deed to his entire retirement. You got your wish at the party, Dad, I said. This really is the last time you'll see me across a table like this one. I took the brass compass out of my pocket and set it on the table for one beat, right on top of the quitclaim deed I'd refused to sign. Then I picked it back up. Grandpa left me this too, I said. He always told me true north doesn't argue, it just points. I slid the compass into my pocket, turned to Marcus. We're done. We walked out together, through the lobby, past the receptionist, into the cold, bright morning. Behind us, I could hear Raymond's voice climbing, arguing with the escrow officer, with Denise Corbin, with the air itself. I didn't turn around. I'd spent 36 years turning around every time my father raised his voice. I was done with that. The parking lot was quiet. The sky went on forever. And for the first time since I was 20 years old, I had nothing left to prove. Meridian pulled out of the deal that afternoon. Denise Corbin sent over a formal notice terminating the purchase agreement, citing an unresolved title defect. $2.7 million, gone from Raymond's retirement plan somewhere between breakfast and lunch. Everything downstream came apart fast. Raymond's deposit on the RV, forfeited. The condo contract in Wenatchee, canceled, earnest money lost. Dale's $720,000 loan, the bank invoked the material change clause and froze the credit line pending renegotiation. Inside of 2 weeks, his plans for a new warehouse and a fleet of trucks were dead on the table. Raymond came out of retirement, not by choice. Without the land money, his savings couldn't carry the life he'd promised Sandra. He went back to the supply yard 3 days a week, answering phones and going over invoices in the same office he'd left with a champagne toast a month before. The town noticed. Sable Lake is small, and word travels. Not because I said a thing, but because 180 people had watched Raymond humiliate his own daughter at a party, and now every last one of them knew the punchline he'd missed. "Did you hear about the Fosters?" became the opening line at the diner, at the club, at the hardware store Raymond still owned. Mocked his own daughter, and it turns out she owned the land the whole time. I didn't gloat. Didn't post anything, didn't give interviews, didn't return the calls from relatives who suddenly remembered they wanted to reconnect. I let the facts sit exactly where they were. On a recorded deed in a county office, typed out in plain English, available to anybody who cared to look. I didn't need the last word. The deed had it. A couple months later, I drove back up to Sable Lake. Not for the family, for the land. Aunt Nancy met me at the cabin, and we spent a weekend ripping blackberry vines off the porch, replacing rotted boards on the dock, airing out rooms that hadn't been opened since Harold died. The brass compass went up on the mantel above the fireplace he'd built stone by stone. "What are you going to do with all this?" Nancy asked, standing on the new dock boards, solid now, no groaning, watching the sun drop behind the ridge. "Keep it," I said. "Maybe put a conservation easement on the timber acreage. Protect it from development for good." Harold would have loved that. Harold would have told me I was overthinking it and handed me a fishing rod. She laughed. First real laugh I'd heard out of anyone in that family in years. Sandra sent one last text. I read it once. "You've destroyed this family. I hope you're happy." I didn't answer. Not because I was happy, because I'd already said everything I needed to say in a room full of witnesses on the record. I started therapy the month after, not crisis therapy, the kind where you sit in a quiet office and unpack 36 years of being told you were less than. My therapist asked if I had any regrets. "I regret that it was necessary," I said. "I don't regret doing it." Raymond never called. Dale never called. Ashley blocked me on everything, which honestly felt more like a gift than a punishment. Nancy and I have dinner once a month. She tells me stories about my grandfather, about the man who built a cabin with his hands and a compass and a belief that the land remembers who tends it. He was right about that. Last weekend, I drove out to the cabin by myself, parked in the clearing Harold always used, walked the tree line the way he taught me, slow, reading the ground, compass in hand. The firs stood tall and straight. The huckleberries were coming in thick. The trail down to the water was clear for the first time in years. I sat on the dock at dusk. The new boards held firm under me. No groan, no give. Across the water, a loon called, that long, trembling note that sounds like loneliness and freedom at the same time. I set the compass on the boards beside me and watched the needle settle. True north. Same as always. I listened until the echo faded into the trees, then I picked up my compass, stood, and walked back up to the cabin.